Parashat Tzav takes us to the intimacy and kedusha of the Mikdash and the Mishkan, the world of Karbanot. These things can, for some of us, be hard to relate to. They seem far away from an ancient world, distant from our present-day concerns. Yet close inspection of one of the mitzvot at the beginning of our parsha provides a surprising and powerful connection to an issue facing, quite literally, the entire world. The Chumash tells us that there's a mitzvah of Eish Tamid Tukal al Mizbeach, that always has to be a fire burning on the altar, and specifically Uveir Aleha Kohen Eitzim Baboker Baboker. There has to be wood burnt by the Kohanim each morning, every morning, early in the morning, by the priests. And a constant fire requires a constant source of fuel, and over time is going to require a lot of fuel. And going on with the question of the source of this fuel, the Gemara and the Mefarshim in Masechet Tamid Daf Chav Tet record the basic halacha and subsequent discussion about which woods are acceptable or not for fuel. The basic halacha is that all woods are acceptable, and yet the Gemara discusses and the commentaries various qualities of wood, how much smoke or ash they make, whether they bear fruit, what their species are, their age, their knottiness, their moisture levels, and so on. And they identify preferences as well as prohibit some of the wood sources from being used. Specifically, the Gemara says that one source of prohibition is Mishum Yishuv de Eretz Yisrael, that because of the settlement of the land of Israel, some wood types are unacceptable. And in his teshuvah Sheilat Yavetz, Chelak Aleph Siman Ayin Vav, Rabbi Yaakov Emden analyzes this issue of Yishuv de Eretz Yisrael. And he notes that cutting down a single or a scattered tree for a temple or a mitzvah purpose is clearly permitted. And he expresses astonishment at some early Rishonim, who thought that using olive trees for building the Beit HaMikdash might pose a halachic problem as a result of this view, which he considers to be obviously correct, permissible. Nonetheless, the issue before us in this mitzvah of securing a wood supply for the constant burning of the fire on the altar, that requires securing a large and regular wood supply. And that poses a threat to Yishuv de Eretz Yisrael. Specifically, Rabbi Yaakov Emden writes, if we let people fulfill this holy mitzvah however they want, how will they do it? They'll do it as conveniently as they can. They'll simply take whatever they find easily at hand, and they'll give no thought to the longer-term consequences of what they do. And yet he is very explicit about what the long-term consequences will be. It will be the destruction of the wood sources in the settled areas of Eretz Yisrael, and this is not acceptable halachically. The fruit trees and other trees will eventually be all gobbled up by the altar, especially the closer, he doesn't write this, but it's true, the closer to Jerusalem one is. And instead, what Rabbi Yaakov Emden writes is that this concern of for Yishuv de Eretz Yisrael means that they ought to proceed in a different way in collecting the wood. Specifically, they need to expend personal effort, go out to the forest, harvest there, and then schlep the wood back from afar to Yerushalayim, to the temple, and so on, and use it there. And indeed, as the Kesef Mishnah comments on Hilchot Yisri Mizbeach, Perek Zayin Halacha Gimel, this is the view of the Rambam as well, that the proper way to source these trees is min hacharashim, which is to say from the Ya'arim, from the forests. And in other words, the conflict was, how shall we source this wood? Shall we do it in the way that people most find convenient? If so, that's exactly what they'll do. But the long-term result is that we will have an unsustainable practice which will lead to irrevocable destruction of Eretz Yisrael. And this is precisely what the Gemara insisted, according to the understanding of Rabbi Yaakov Emden and possibly the Rambam as well, as being prohibited. And instead, the trade-off is that people have to inconvenience themselves They have to inconvenience themselves by schlepping and pushing and shoving in order to fulfill this mitzvah, especially this mitzvah, or even though it's a mitzvah, whatever the case might be, there's no excuses or explanations. You have to put in the effort and source your natural resources sustainably over a long time period. This is Rabbi Yaakov Emden's and perhaps the Rambam's view on the trade-off between sustainability and convenience. And its implication for our modern world is abundantly clear. Without getting into the details of what precisely constitutes sustainability and what constitutes exactly permitted, prohibited, and or required use of natural resources, the broad issue of using natural resources and doing so in a sustainable way here finds expression in a halachic context in a teshuvah of Rabbi Yaakov Emden, and the preference of the Torah is clear. Let us, as we move from the world of the Mishkan and Mikdash through our commentaries into the modern world, take this lesson and figure out how to apply it to the many times that we too have to make a trade-off between our personal convenience on the one hand and ensuring that we use all of our natural resources in this world, trees and everything else, in a way that's sustainable for the health of humanity and places where people live and all of Earth.